Hello, I'm Brian Kavanagh, and I'm running for re-election to the state Senate representing the 26th district in Lower Manhattan and the western part of Brooklyn. I was first elected to the Senate in 2017, and I spent many years before that serving New Yorkers in the state assembly. As a leading voice in the new Democratic majority in the Senate, I'm proud of the transformative changes we've been able to achieve in the most active legislative term in recent memory. As the chair of the Housing Committee, I led the Senate effort to enact the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act, which gave New York the toughest tenant protections in the nation. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I've worked to keep a moratorium of evictions in place so New Yorkers are not displaced from their homes, and I'm committed to the fight for comprehensive rent relief so the public health and financial crisis doesn't become a long-term housing and homelessness crisis. I also wrote and enacted the strongest legislation in the country to provide mortgage forbearance for homeowners struggling to pay their bills during the pandemic. I've been a strong advocate for the environment, and I was a proud co-sponsor of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which mandates huge cuts in climate pollution, investment in clean and renewable energy, creation of green jobs, and environmental justice. I've also been a leader in the successful effort to reform our campaign finance and election laws to make it easier for all New Yorkers to participate in our democracy and not have their voices drowned out by special interests. For many years now, I've played a major role in passing some of the nation's toughest laws to prevent gun violence. And this year, I was proud to co-sponsor the legislative package we enacted in June to ensure greater accountability, equity, and effectiveness in the ways our police officers serve and protect our communities. Of course, as we continue to fight the COVID-19 pandemic and the enormous financial crisis that has resulted from business shutdowns and declining tax revenues, it's going to be a huge challenge to get New York back on its feet and working again. I know many people are still struggling. I'm running for re-election because I want to continue to do everything I can to bring people together to help New York recover and prosper, and to ensure that our recovery reflects our priorities and our values as New Yorkers. I'm Brian Kavanagh, and if you live in the 26th Senate District, I'd appreciate your support on Election Day, Tuesday, November 3rd, or during early voting. And if you live elsewhere, please vote for Democrats in our federal and state elections. Thank you.
Good day, New Yorkers. My name is Lester Chang. I'm running for New York State Senate. In my family, I'm the first American-born Chinese to immigrant parents who came to this country in search of a better life and opportunities. I started my life in Eldridge Street in Lower East Side. I'm a proud product of public school education, earning my degrees up to master's. I have 23 years in the Navy Reserve and also an Afghanistan war veteran. Previous work experience of over 20 years in senior management in global trade and logistics. In addition, I worked with 30 years in Board of Election as a post-site coordinator in Chinatown. I lived downtown near Little Italy for over 30 years. March of this year, I volunteered to be mobilized again to active duty as first responder in support of COVID operations, where I helped to convert Jacob Javits Convention Center into a field hospital over 2,000 beds in 3 weeks. Today, we live in a different time. We have a war against an unseen enemy called COVID-19, which I think we need an aggressive solution to help New York. First, as a beneficiary of public school education, I support SAT testing. I will lift or eliminate charter school cap. I will stop state-mandated school curriculum to parochial, private, or yeshivas. Second, crime. Recent sky-high crime rate and gun violence. The no new bail law that was passed is not working. Create unintended consequences, promote serialized criminal and are released back in the streets. I will modify this bail law by having the judge to decide the bail amount and create a 3-strike rule. After the third arrest, no new bail options are forfeited. Third, I do not support building community jail. Keep Rikers Island, but renovate them to a 21st century correction facilities. In addition, I will build a transitional facilities to former inmates for job training and any other support service for them and pay them during the transition before they're released into society. Fourth, homelessness. At Rikers, I will build a dormitory-like facilities, but pay them to stay there so we can house them, feed them, train them, treat them, detox them, and importantly, build self-esteem and characters and properly introduce them to society similar to a military recruit. I believe our current wasteful tactics of sheltering them overnight without support does not work. I like the idea of former presidential candidate Andrew Yang, who introduced an idea called universal basic income. I will modify that to low to middle income New Yorkers use the money without restriction or even go towards paying rent. I think this way will solve our homeless issue. Fifth, surprise medical bill. For those who have insurance, when you're in an emergency room or having surgery or hospitalized with COVID, there are independent doctors working in the hospital that may not accept your insurance. You will get a surprise medical bill called out of network. I will pass a bill requiring all doctors to accept your insurance unconditionally as in-network. These and few examples of aggressive ideas I bring to battle against this pandemic. I will always promote and secure New York City, the city I love, the city I'm born in, and I hope you can support me on Election Day, November 3rd. My name is Lester Chang.
Welcome to Represent NYC Election Coverage, brought to you by Manhattan Neighborhood Network in partnership with the League of Women Voters of New York State. My name is Ben Max. I'm the executive editor of Gotham Gazette. New Yorkers will soon be voting in the general election this fall for races including president and vice president, the U.S. House of Representatives, the New York State Senate and Assembly, and more. Today, we're bringing you a candidate debate in one state Senate election for a district that includes parts of Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn. All registered voters can vote either by absentee ballot or by voting in person, either through the early voting period from October 24th through November 1st, or on Election Day, November 3rd. New York's 26th State Senate District is one of the state legislative seats up for election, one of just 63 state Senate seats across the state, all of which are on the ballot this fall, along with the entire state assembly. The 26th State Senate District covers much of Lower Manhattan and the eastern Brooklyn coastline, including Tribeca, Chinatown, some of the Lower East Side and the Financial District, as well as parts of Dumbo, Greenpoint, Williamsburg, Brooklyn Heights, Cobble Hill, downtown Brooklyn, and other parts of Manhattan and Brooklyn. We're pleased to bring you a candidate debate in the race between incumbent State Senator Brian Kavanagh, who is the Democratic and Working Families Party nominee, and his challenger, Lester Chang, who is the Republican and Conservative Party nominee. Both candidates are here with us by Zoom, and we thank you both for being here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Max.
So the format of this 30-minute debate is as follows, and then we'll get right into it in just another minute. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to answer each question posed, and about a minute for rebuttals when needed. We want voters to learn as much as possible about your positions, proposals, and approach to being a state senator. Your candidate statements will have just played for the audience, so we don't need to do opening statements, but at the end of the debate, each candidate will give a 1-minute closing statement. I also want to warn you candidates that as we reach the end of your time to answer, I will first say a gentle thank you and give you about 3 more seconds to wrap up your answer, and then I'll jump back in to move things along. And I might also jump in toward the end of your answer just to ask for clarification or a specific example related to something you've said if I think something is confusing or a little vague. So don't be surprised if I jump in and say, can you provide an example of what you were just talking about? All right, so let's talk about experience and qualifications. Mr. Chang, you're the challenger. Why are you seeking this state Senate position, and what experience makes you the right candidate for it?
Thank you, Mr. Max. I'm very simply, I'm 23 years in the Navy Reserve and still continue serving right now. I'm a Afghanistan war veteran. And in addition, I'm right now on active duty with the with Naval Militia with the covert operations right now and preparing for our second surge right now. And concurrently, I've been doing 30 years of a New York City Board of Election as a poll worker coordinator in Chinatown. Make sure all the voters, and especially Chinese voters, are having their vote counted in transparent and translated form. And very little in private life, sir. I have over 20 years in the freight forwarding industry and moving cargoes and traveling overseas as well. So with the breadth and depth of experience I have, in particularly in the military side, I think I will bring a slightly different tenor in the Senate floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. Senator Kavanagh, you've been in the state Senate. You're the incumbent. Before that, you were in the state assembly. What makes you deserving of another term here in the state Senate?
Let me just begin, first of all, by thanking Ben for moderating today, and MNN for hosting this debate, and my opponent, Lester Chang, for standing for office and joining today, taking time out of his busy schedule to debate today. I think it's very important that the voters, get to see the candidates in this peculiar time when a lot of our normal campaigning activities aren't really possible. I'm very proud of the work that the Senate majority has done in the last 2 years. We had many years where control of the legislature was split. I served in the Assembly for 11 years, and during that time pushed for protections for tenants, campaign finance and election reform, environmental reform, including climate change legislation. And all of those things were very difficult to accomplish because Republicans controlled the Senate majority and mostly declined to act on those things. As a leading voice in the Senate majority, I've played a big role in delivering on the promises we made for many years. I'm the chair of the Housing Committee. We passed the strongest tenant protection legislation in the country, arguably the strongest legislation that's been passed in the last half century to protect tenants and stabilize our communities, ensure the people that built our communities can continue to afford to live there. During the COVID pandemic, I've been pushing very hard to make sure that we keep our eviction moratorium in place. And I also authored and passed the strongest piece of legislation for forbearance for mortgages for homeowners who may be struggling to pay their mortgages. I was a co-sponsor of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which again sets very tough targets for carbon emissions reduction and green jobs and environmental justice. The first thing we did upon taking the majority was pass a very broad package of campaign finance and election reform legislation. I sponsored the LLC loophole closer, which is one of the most egregious loopholes in our campaign finance reform system. And so all of this work, I think, has been important. It's been a big step forward, but we have a lot of work to do going forward, especially recovering from COVID. And I believe that my experience is the right experience to continue to represent this community.
And in just a minute, we're going to move into what needs to be done next in terms of the state and the city recovering from the COVID crisis and its many outcomes. Mr. Chang, you described a little bit about what you think you would bring in terms of your perspective and your experience to the state Senate. Is there anything that Senator Kavanagh just named, though? Are there policies that the Senate Democratic majority has passed in the last 2 years now that you disagree with, that you take most issue with, that you think are mistakes? Are there reasons that you think the sitting state senator doesn't really deserve re-election as he goes for it?
Well, one big one right now he recently signed is the Bail Reform Act. And that's created a huge problem right now. It handcuffs the police department right now of arresting the perpetrator, and they're out in the street and creating a crime again and again. And I talked to many of my cops, friends and co-workers in the military, and they're not happy with this bail reform laws. Now, the simple, if I was to propose to modify this, is to let the judge make the bail, even with free bail as well. But also, I would make a 3-strike rule. If you get arrested 3 times in a row, then the 3rd time you forfeited the free bail. That's one thing that needs to be modified. Second, 5 years ago, no surprise bill for the insurance. Especially, I'm married for 19 years. I'm a widow for 1 year, and I have very good insurance in the military. Several times I take my wife to the emergency room, and when I get home, a few months later, I get a surprise bill because some of the doctors who moonlight in the hospital itself do not accept my military insurance, TRICARE. Now, of course, there is a provision that was passed the law 4 years ago, a no surprise bill. But I want to take it further. Any doctors who work in a hospital and have no choice of selecting your in-network doctors, they should unconditionally accept that patient's insurance. Because if you're in an emergency room, you can't pick and choose which doctor are in network because you're going to get a surprise bill because they're out of network. That needs to be strengthened. And third of all is my position and stance on SHSAT. I want to preserve that. That's the very important rule. I don't know what's Mr. Kavanagh's position on, because I've been a product of public school.
That's about the end of your time.
Yes.
So that's a good list of 3 things, and we'll get Senator Kavanagh to respond. I do want to quickly say we're very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
You're doing okay. Senator Kavanagh, do you want to respond to criticism on the bail reform and provide your position on the SHSAT, which of course is the specialized high school entrance exam? And if you want to discuss anything about the surprise billing that Mr. Chang mentioned, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try to do all three. Thank you for that's a good specific. On bail reform, the important thing to remember is that for a very long time, we were holding people, sometimes for significant periods, who had not been convicted of a crime simply because they could not come up with a modest amount of money. That was a system that led to tremendous injustice, and it went against our basic notion in our society that you're innocent until proven guilty. We passed a broad package of reforms last year. We stepped in this year to make some adjustments to that, partly to address some of the concerns that Mr. Chang has raised. For example, we do have provisions in place that make it clear that if somebody is arrested repeatedly on the same offense, they can be held on bail based on the fact that they've been arrested multiple times for the same offense. We also switched some crimes from non-bailable, from crimes that the judge could not hold on bail, to crimes that that judges can hold bail. This is a work in progress. It's a very broad reform of the legislation of the system, and it really was intended to address those injustices. And I think largely it has succeeded in doing that. Having said that, we showed an ability to make adjustments, and I think we'll continue to make adjustments as necessary to prevent injustice and also to ensure that the system is working as intended. I do not think there is good evidence, even though some police officers and police unions have said so, that bail reform has resulted in the significant increase in crime and violent crime that we've seen. And I think that's a serious concern that we need to address, but I don't think bail reform is behind that. On the insurance issue, I agree with Mr. Chang. I think that we've been working hard to make sure that people have access to universal coverage for insurance. And certainly, if I was hospitalized with surgery last year and many doctors came by, and it was amazing how many different bills you get, and you should not be sitting in there in a hospital bed deciding whether this doctor is going to treat you depending on what their policies are with respect to insurance. With respect to the selected high school admissions test, I have not joined the mayor in calling for this to simply be eliminated. The mayor, in a way that this administration often does, announced a new policy without consultation. I understand from the chancellor and from the principal of Stuyvesant High School, which is located in my district, that they did not even discuss it with the principals of the high schools before they announced the new policy. I do think that there are probably better ways than just a single exam with no other factors going into these admissions tests, going to admissions decisions, but the city has not proffered a rational system for doing that. And I agree with people who are concerned that just throwing out the test without having a sort of a smart system for doling out these very valuable seats in schools is not the way to go.
So it sounds like at this juncture, you don't have a particular fix that you're advocating for.
Yeah, and I don't think that I haven't seen, again, the only real alternative admissions process that's been on the table has been the mayor's. And I think it was developed in secrecy and doesn't really pass muster.
Okay, so let's stick with you, Senator Kavanagh, then we'll come back to Mr. Chang. What does this district need next from state government, specifically in terms of the recovery from the COVID crises, in terms of both public health, socioeconomic effects? What really needs to be done next in state government to help your constituents?
We are still dealing with some of the most immediate needs. We still have food lines and food deliveries to people who can't otherwise eat. We need to continue to support those. It's very, very critical. Some of them are running low on funding. So we need to continue to make sure we're meeting those basic needs. We need to make sure that transitions to schools being in session and other activities as they begin up are done in the safest way possible so that we avoid a resurgence of infection rates. And we've done well, and especially we've done well in Lower Manhattan and in Chinatown on this issue. But we have enormous amount of economic crisis to dig our way out of. I chair the Housing Committee. I mentioned before that our short-term solution has been an eviction moratorium to prevent people from being removed from their homes during the pandemic. It's critical that we keep that in place. I have legislation that keep it in place at least until late January, and then we would reassess it as we go. But we also need to find a way to pay the rent of people who have been unable to afford rent during this period because of through no fault of their own. Their businesses were shut down, their jobs were suspended, and many people are struggling. So we really need to find a way to address that, not only because it's the humane thing to do for tenants, but also because those payments go to landlords who in turn pay their property taxes and cover our most basic services. Small businesses are really suffering. A good fraction of all businesses are vulnerable to being shut down. I have proposed a bill that would link property tax abatements with long-term affordable leases that landlords and tenants could get together and develop. I'm working on that with Yulee New and Brad Lander and Keith Powers in the City Council, and we're hoping that that's a meaningful tool. But we need a variety of tools to sort of stabilize our businesses and make sure that they continue to make our neighborhoods the vibrant places that they have been.
Thank you. Mr. Chang, what do you think the state government needs to do next in terms of trying to foster recovery in New York City, and especially in this district you're hoping to represent?
Well, thank you, certainly. First thing I want to make sure the audience who's watching us is, first thing, wear your face mask, do all the necessary thing you have to protect yourself, because I'm a frontline first responder when I answered a call when Javits Center needed to be converted to a hospital. So I was there, volunteer my time and service over there, and I still do right now. So most important thing, without an effective vaccine or real effective treatment, we'll be still the same where we are. And the problem right now I can see is the governor is want to create his task force to review the vaccine, and then you get the FDA and the CDC have their own standards. So that's something that's going to be confused for the public, whether they take the vaccine or not. So even for us, with the National Guard or the military, who do we follow to take the vaccines? Okay, so that's the first thing. That's going to be a long-term, 1 to 2 years down the line without that effective treatment. So I agree most of what Mr. Kavanagh say, and trying to get relief, both tenants and the owners itself. And one thing is, I'm a very simple person. I'm not a politician, but I have to thank the governors following the scientific way of containing this virus itself, because certain states will have 5% or more positivity rate, and we're just maintaining just barely 1%. New York City about 3% right now, just reported in today. So I have to give them credit on the governor itself, because as long as it maintains scientific application of how we containing the virus, that's great. But what Mr. Kavanagh has proposing, that's great. But I have a question: is how do we pay for all this? Because it has to come somewhere. And
that's actually my next question. Good, and that's about the end of your time. So let's transition. Let's transition into that and actually stick with you, Mr. Chang, and then we'll come back to Senator Kavanagh. So the state has a massive budget hole because of a huge drop in tax revenue because the economy was shut down for so long. What do you think needs to be done to close that budget gap? There's a variety of measures that are being discussed, from revenue raisers to cuts to just, I guess, hoping and praying that the federal government comes through with money to plug the hole. What do you think needs to happen, Mr. Chang?
Well, short of the governor have his own printing press to print this thing out. But yes, we need the federal government. There's no other way. There is no other government that can help bail us out, because we're not the only one that's suffering. As well, 50 other states will be suffering. So short of that, all other revenues, I suspect, will have to go up, have to be generated either through sales tax or whatever property tax. It had to be some sort, because this is a big hole itself. But I'm sure with whatever our government, even our state, raise the money and pay for it, at least it will continue to drive the economy. We have to have people having money in their pocket to continue to sustain this economy. If some way we were to restrict our budget back in the 1930s and during the Depression, then we will choke our economy. So we need to spend the money. We need to put a little bit of inflation to put money in the people's pockets' hand to drive for this. And I think the government currently is doing what they can, but bottom line, we need Uncle Sam to come out with a big printing press to help us out.
All right, Senator Kavanagh, that doesn't sound too different than what we're hearing from Democrats in Albany. What's your stance?
Yeah, I think we're a broad agreement there. First of all, I just want to take a moment to agree with Mr. Chang. It is critical that people continue to do the things necessary to protect ourselves: masks, testing, all of those things. And it's great to hear that very strong call for that. Yeah, and I think we do have a substantially similar position with respect to how to dig our way out of this. States do not have the ability to run the kinds of deficits that the federal government can run. Our bond ratings and our ability to borrow would dry up very quickly if we spent way more than our revenue. So I have called from the beginning for significant fiscal stimulus from the federal government. That means direct money to not only to the state, but to localities like New York City to allow us to balance our budgets without really egregious cuts. And also specific needs like the pandemic unemployment, which expired at the end of July, needs to be continued for people who are still out of work. And I got many people together, hundreds of people together, to call on the federal government to provide $100 billion for rent relief, of which under normal formulas, New York State might get about 10 billion. And that really would go a long way toward addressing that rent crisis I talked about earlier. We do also need revenue at the state level. We're going to have to probably make some cuts. We should make sure we do those cuts, try to target the cuts in such a way that we protect core services, schools, basic social services, the transit system, all the things that we need to keep things running. But one of the ways to avoid really deep cuts is going to be to find additional revenue. I've personally come out in favor of taxing unrealized capital gains. There are many people who have done extraordinarily well during the pandemic. Their assets have risen. You normally wouldn't pay taxes on those things until you sell, but I think an unrealized capital gains tax might make sense. But whatever it is, we need to find a way to generate a significant amount of revenue from wealthier New Yorkers who are not suffering the way so many others are.
And just quickly, that's the one revenue raising proposal right now that you support? Is there anything else you think the state should do? I mean, that's one that the folks I've talked to think, if passed, would quickly wind up in court and could take quite a while to potentially be enacted if it is upheld. Yeah,
well, the advantage of that is that it's intended to tax something that's existed. I don't know that it is terribly difficult, like terribly. I mean, anything we propose could be challenged in court. I don't know that it's particularly vulnerable to being struck down by judges. I think it is well within the kind of taxing authorities that states have. But I think the critical thing about this is that we ensure that whatever we do is aimed to address the real deficit we have, and that it generates substantial amount of money, and that it do so relatively quickly. So I favored the pied-à-terre tax in the past. I have voted in the assembly a number of times for a substantial personal income tax surcharge on people making very large amounts of money. The trick with that is that, a personal income tax surcharge typically would be done on income going forward, so you wouldn't see the revenue until next year. So we need a multi-year solution, and we need a package of revenue sources that will generate significant revenue this year and hopefully next year. And, the governor said it the other day, it's kind of an all of the above approach, but I think the people who would pay a personal income tax surcharge overlap heavily with the people who might pay a capital gains tax. So I think we need to get a balance of different packages. I would favor a variety of these.
So we've got about 5 more minutes here, and I want to get in one more question before closing statements. Mr. Chang, did you want to add something to that discussion?
Yes, because we have to be mindful, okay, the people who has money, who are wealthy, they have a means to relocate to different areas. So you're basically encouraging people going to a low tax and no tax area, even though you want to do a property, a capital gains tax, but you're going to alienate the people who has the money. Just like Donald Trump, he moved down to Florida. So there's only so much you can do. So it could be a balance, not in such a way that that will create a movement outside of New York, because they have the means.
You've both been involved in the city's elections, either helping them run or legislating. We're in the midst of an election here that you're obviously both running in. We've already seen problems with the Board of Elections implementing and administering the election. At the state legislative level, what's the sort of short to medium to long-term plan for fixing the New York City Board of Elections, Mr. Chang? What do you think can be legislated through the state legislature to help fix how the City Board of Elections runs elections in New York?
Sorry, you open a can of worms, because I've seen them very inefficiently run. And first is the way the voted, the count on the machines need to be updated. I prefer an online system somewhat with a paper receipt. We're far from it. So that's one thing. And one thing we need to streamline is the procedures, especially for for the poll workers on processing and registering the people. Especially, it takes about over a year to change your change registration for a different party. It shouldn't take that long if we do everything online. And one thing, raise the salary of the poll workers from $250 to $300 because we have problems with getting people to work. So if we can do that, that will solve the labor.
In the interest of time, unfortunately, I'm gonna move it to Senator Kavanagh for a quick answer on this, and then come back to you, Mr. Chang, for your closing statement. Senator Kavanagh.
Yeah, I would just note that we've taken a number of steps in the past year that took a very long time to do, including early voting, constitutional amendment, no excuse absentee, and other steps that were intended to improve the system. And I think that they are, it is a good thing that those things are in place, especially early voting, because with mail-in balloting being complex and difficult to administer, it's important that people note that you can start voting the Saturday before Election Day on October 24th and vote right up early through the Sunday before Election Day. So that's an option people should avail themselves of. I agree with some of what Mr. Chang said. We do need to make sure that we have professionalized the poll workers on Election Day. That does involve greater pay. It also involves insisting that the board use part-day shifts. Right now, they try to recruit a lot of people to work 16 or 17 hours. That's a limited pool of people who are willing and able to do that. They ought to be having split the day in half so that people can work from early morning until midday and then take the rest of the day off, or start at midday and work until the close of polls. I have sponsored legislation in the past that would allow for professional qualifications other than partisan qualifications. Right now, there has to be a Republican and a Democrat at each point level. There ought to be other professional qualifications. That appears to require a constitutional amendment, and I proposed that amendment. We have to, more than just through oversight and accountability, we have to continue to push the New York City board in particular to address its longstanding administrative problems. I will say that this year we have thrown an incredible array of challenges at them by changing the law multiple times.
Right, indeed. All right, we're going to move to closing statements. Mr. Chang, 1 minute. You're up first. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. My name is Lester Chang. I'm 23 years in the military service and sacrificed quite a bit of my time and my life to serve my country, and I would still do the same thing with my fellow New Yorkers. One thing, I'm not a politician, so I just do everything what is pragmatic, what I think is common sense. But also, from my experience, collaborative with across the aisle is very important to get things done for getting the bills passed. And I will listen to voters what they really need, what they want on the level itself. Homeless issue is one, crime is another, quality of life, all those issues are done at a micro managed level. So those I want to hear and see what we can do on the state level to help out. And one thing is I do promise myself, and I'm not sure if Mr. Kavanagh will keep this promise, but once elected, I would term limit myself no more than 10 years. Because from my experience in the military, we always train people who will replace us. So no more than 10 years, because we need to have people to have the opportunity to do their ideas to be an elected official for the next generation.
Thank you. And Senator Kavanagh, your closing statement.
First of all, I want to begin by agreeing with Mr. Chang on one thing. It really is important that we reach across the aisle and work together. And let me reach across the aisle and thank him for his service and for standing for election and for bringing his ideas to this debate and to this campaign. I am very proud of what we have done in just a little less than 2 years now with Democrats in the majority in both houses. And I think it's important that New York continue that path. This is a wonderful diverse district. We have enormous challenges here in our district and across the state. And I and my colleagues have worked very hard to represent people well. We haven't talked about a lot of the local issues like and the proposed jails in our communities and homelessness, which is on the rise. But we have a lot of challenges, but we also have a lot of opportunity. It's going to take a while for us to dig our way out of the COVID-19 pandemic and all of its economic challenges that come with it. But again, my colleagues and I have worked hard. I think we've shown a lot of success, and I would greatly appreciate the honor of continuing to represent this district. So if you live in the 26th Senate District, I'd appreciate your support on Election Day, Tuesday, November 3rd. And if you live elsewhere and you're watching this, please vote for Democrats on the federal and state elections. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to both candidates. This has been a good, spirited, thoughtful debate. A reminder to you, the viewers and voters, all eligible registered voters can walk in or mail in an absentee ballot. You can participate in early voting October 24th through November 1st, or you can vote on Election Day, Tuesday, November 3rd. Thank you for watching Represent NYC Election Coverage on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. For more election coverage or information, you can visit MNN.org, the League of Women Voters at LWVNY.org, or us at GothamGazette.com. I'm Ben Max from Gotham Gazette. Goodbye.